5:52 in the morning on December 26, 1996, the Boulder Regional Communications Center received an emergency transmission from a residence at 755 15th Street. The call, which lasted strictly 2 minutes and 10 seconds, would mark the beginning of case number 96-18055. The caller, identified in the dispatch logs as Patsy Ramsey, reported that her 6-year-old daughter was missing and stated that a handwritten note had been discovered on the back staircase. The audio recording captured a high level of distress, with the caller making a frantic request for authorities before the line was disconnected. The context of the subsequent investigation was heavily influenced by the demographic and operational profile of Boulder, Colorado. At the time, the city experienced very few major felonies of this nature. Records show that the police department was staffed and trained primarily for property crimes and traffic enforcement, rather than complex capital cases. The residence itself was a sprawling Tudor-style home, spanning over 7,000 square feet with 4 distinct levels, multiple staircases, and a complex layout. This intricate environment, combined with a lack of specialized experience among the responding officers, would become a significant factor in the hours immediately following the initial dispatch. Officer Rick French was the first responding officer, arriving at the location at 5:59 in the morning, just 7 minutes after the call was placed. Upon arrival, Officer French noted that the Ramsey family, John, Patsy, and their 9-year-old son were present. The primary piece of physical evidence presented to law enforcement at this stage was the handwritten document mentioned in the call. It consisted of 3 pages spread across the wooden steps of the spiral staircase leading to the kitchen. This document, referred to in the case files as the ransom note, became the subject of intense forensic scrutiny. The text demanded the sum of $118,000 for the safe return of the child. Investigators later noted a direct correlation between this specific amount and a bonus John Ramsey had received from his employer, Access Graphics, earlier that year. The sum appeared on his pay stub, a detail that suggested the author had knowledge of the family's finances. The note claimed to be from a foreign faction. Yet, forensic linguistic analysis performed later would focus heavily on the phrasing and syntax, which appeared to mimic tropes from popular media rather than standard negotiation demands. Crucially, the physical components of the note originated from within the home. The paper was identified as coming from a legal pad kept near the telephone in the kitchen. A felt-tip pen, also belonging to the residence, was determined to be the writing instrument. This indicated that the author had likely spent a significant amount of time within the common areas of the house, draft the lengthy message. Later analysis would confirm that a practice note had been attempted and discarded on the same pad, suggesting a deliberation inconsistent with a hurried abduction. Procedural errors began almost immediately regarding this evidence. The note was handled by multiple individuals before being secured, compromising potential latent fingerprints. Furthermore, the pad from which the note was written was not immediately seized or tested for indentations. By 6:10 in the morning, a critical procedural failure occurred regarding the security of the location. In standard protocol for a kidnapping or major felony investigation, the location is effectively locked down to preserve the state of the environment. However, records indicate that friends of the family were called by the Ramseys and began arriving at the house shortly after 6 o'clock. Fleet and Priscilla White, along with John and Barbara Fernie, arrived shortly after the police. By 7 in the morning, 5 civilians were present within the home, in addition to the family and law enforcement. These individuals were allowed to move freely through the kitchen and living areas. In the kitchen, where the ransom note had likely been written, surfaces were wiped down by well-meaning individuals attempting to clean up after breakfast preparations. This action effectively altered the environment before a forensic team could process the area, potentially obliterating latent fingerprints or trace DNA. During this initial phase, Officer French conducted a preliminary walkthrough of the house. His report states that he checked the main floor and the second floor before descending to the basement. The basement layout was complex, consisting of a finished play area, a laundry room, and several storage areas. Officer French approached a door in the basement that was secured with a wooden latch. Seeing the latch was in the locked position from the outside, he deduced that the child could not be inside and did not open the door, assuming it was a closet or storage area. This decision is cited in retrospect as a pivotal moment where the timeline of discovery could have been altered. The timeline of the morning was dictated by the instructions in the note, which stated that the faction would call between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock that morning to provide delivery instructions. Police set up recording equipment on the home telephone lines. Investigators waited for the call, but the deadline passed without contact. During this waiting period, the search for the missing child was limited, and the atmosphere in the house shifted from frantic anticipation to confused stagnation. By mid-morning, the situation within the house had deteriorated into a chaotic mix of law enforcement and civilians. Detective Linda Arndt, who had arrived around 8:10 in the morning, was the sole detective on the scene for several hours, as other officers were briefed or deployed elsewhere. The logs reflect that the environment was not treated as a location of a fatal incident, but rather as the staging ground for a kidnapping negotiation. Consequently, no barrier tape was established indoors, and the movement of people was not logged. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, with no call from the alleged kidnappers and the atmosphere in the house growing tense, Detective Arndt instructed John Ramsey and one of the family friends, Fleet White, to search the house again for anything unusual. This directive deviated from standard procedure, which typically reserves secondary searches for trained law enforcement personnel to ensure chain of custody and scene integrity. According to the statements provided by both men, they proceeded to the basement. At approximately 1:05 in the afternoon, John Ramsey opened the door to the room Officer French had bypassed hours earlier. This room, often described as a wine cellar, was a small, windowless space tucked into the rear of the basement layout. Inside, lying on the cement floor, John Ramsey discovered the missing child. The actions taken immediately following this discovery further compromised the forensic integrity of the case. Records state that John Ramsey carried the child up the stairs from the basement to the living room floor. In doing so, the positioning of the individual was lost, and any potential evidence on the clothing or skin was subjected to cross-contamination from the father's clothing and physical contact. Detective Arndt described seeing him emerge from the basement, holding the child out in front of him. He placed the individual on the floor in the living room near the Christmas tree. This movement accomplished two detrimental outcomes from an evidentiary standpoint. First, it disturbed the settling of livor mortis, complicating the coroner's ability to determine the precise time of the fatal incident. Second, it introduced a massive amount of transfer evidence. A blanket from the basement was wrapped around the child, introducing new fibers to the evidence. Upon placing the child on the floor, a second blanket from the couch was placed over the top. This layering of textiles created a complex web of fiber transfer that would make distinguishing between innocent contact and perpetrator contact nearly impossible. When the individual was brought upstairs, Detective Arndt moved the body to check for vital signs. Finding none, she noted the condition of the individual. Rigor mortis was already present, indicating that the loss of life had occurred significantly earlier than the discovery. Observations recorded in the initial report noted a cord-like device around the neck and the right wrist. Adhesive tape was also noted on the mouth, though it had been partially loosened. It was not until nearly an hour after the discovery that the house was finally cleared and secured as a location of a fatal incident. The timeline of the investigation then shifted from a kidnapping response to a death investigation. But the initial 6 hours had created an evidentiary deficit that would plague the case for decades. The police reports from that day indicate a struggle to transition between these two modes of operation. By the time the coroner arrived and the technical teams began their work, the primary location, the basement room, had been entered by at least 3 people, and the secondary location, the living room where the child was placed, had been trampled by nearly everyone present. The autopsy, conducted the following day by Dr. John Mayer of the Boulder County Coroner's Office, provided the clinical details of the fatal event. The report indicated that the cause of the cessation of life was asphyxia associated with craniocerebral trauma. The examination revealed an 8 1/2 inch fracture running the length of the right side of the skull. The severity of this injury suggested a significant blow. Yet, there was no external bleeding associated with the wound, explaining why first responders did not immediately identify the head injury. Additionally, a ligature was found around the neck. The device was constructed from a length of white nylon cord and a broken paintbrush handle, which had been used to tighten the cord. The missing portion of the paintbrush was found in a tub of art supplies near the kitchen, linking the weapon directly to materials available within the home. A similar ligature was found loosely tied around the right wrist. The autopsy report also noted the presence of foreign DNA, samples taken from beneath the fingernails and from the fabric of the undergarments worn by the child, yielded a genetic profile that did not match family members. This unknown male profile was entered into the CODIS database, but failed to generate a match. The existence of this genetic material became a cornerstone of the defense strategy, suggesting the presence of an unauthorized individual in the home. However, the exact source and timing of this DNA deposit remained a subject of debate, as the transfer of genetic material can occur through innocent contact or manufacturing processes. The timeline of the evening prior to the report became a focus for detectives, relying heavily on digestive analysis. The autopsy report noted the presence of pineapple in the stomach, which had not yet been fully digested. This biological clock suggested that the individual had consumed the fruit shortly before the fatal incident occurred. Investigators found a bowl of pineapple on the breakfast table with a spoon in it. This bowl became a focal point of the timeline reconstruction, although the parents denied feeding the child pineapple and stated she had been put to bed immediately upon their return home at 10 o'clock. Fingerprints belonging to the brother and the mother were identified on the bowl and spoon. This biological evidence placed the time of the incident much closer to the family's arrival home than the kidnapping narrative suggested. Investigators noted that there were no signs of forced entry at the exterior doors or windows. Spider webs in the window wells of the basement were reportedly undisturbed. A broken window in the basement was noted, but John Ramsey stated he had broken it months prior when he locked himself out. This detail was checked against the presence of debris. A small amount of glass was found on the floor, but the distribution of the shards became a point of contention regarding whether the window had been used as an entry point on the night in question. A suitcase was found positioned beneath this window, containing a footprint in the mold, which some investigators argued indicated an intruder's exit route, though this was never definitively proven. The investigation also examined a heavy flashlight found on the kitchen counter. It was a Maglite brand, which John Ramsey denied owning, though reports suggested a similar item had been seen in the house previously. The dimensions of the flashlight were consistent with the depression fracture on the skull. However, no blood or tissue was found on the object to conclusively link it to the injury. Procedural failures continued to plague the relationship between the Boulder Police Department and the district attorney's office. The police focused heavily on the parents, theorizing that the incident was a domestic event covered up to look like an external threat. Conversely, the district attorney's office leaned into the evidence of forced entry and the unknown DNA. The formal interviews with the parents were delayed significantly. While preliminary conversations took place, formal interrogation did not occur for 4 months. This delay allowed the timeline of events to calcify in the memories of the witnesses without immediate challenge from law enforcement. Forensic analysis of the handwriting on the note remained inconclusive but suggestive. Experts at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation ruled out John Ramsey as the author, but could not eliminate Patsy Ramsey. On a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being elimination, she scored a 0.5. This did not confirm authorship, but it prevented her clearance. The specific phrasing used in the note, including references to a foreign faction and specific countermeasures, was analyzed by linguists who suggested the writer was attempting to disguise their identity. By 1998, a grand jury was convened to review the evidence. For 13 months, the jurors heard testimony and reviewed thousands of pages of documents. The proceedings were secret, but it was later revealed that the grand jury voted to indict the parents on charges related to child abuse resulting in death and being an accessory to a crime. However, the district attorney at the time declined to sign the indictment, citing insufficient evidence to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. He believed that the compromised scene, the conflicting DNA evidence, and the lack of a confession would result in an acquittal. In 2008, new DNA technology allowed for a more advanced analysis of the skin cells found on the garments. The results were consistent with the profile found under the fingernails. This prompted the district attorney at the time to issue a letter of apology to the family, stating that the DNA evidence exonerated them. However, subsequent review by police leadership clarified that the presence of unexplained DNA does not necessarily absolve individuals of involvement, leaving the matter legally unresolved. The context of the JonBenet Ramsey case is defined by the collision of a high-stakes, high-pressure event with a small-town procedural response. The records from December 26th illustrate a cascading series of deviations from protocol. The failure to secure the perimeter, the contamination of the handwriting evidence, the utilization of civilians for search operations, and the disturbance of the individual before forensic documentation could occur. These initial hours established a foundation of uncertainty that no amount of subsequent testing or analysis has been able to fully resolve. The investigation began not with the systematic collection of facts, but with the gradual erosion of the scene's integrity, leaving a fragmented picture that investigators are still attempting to piece together. The file remains